What happens when the lights go out, and the patrol cars stay? Menglong's parents under guard. Police provide 24/7 protection amid alleged intimidation. Who's behind the pressure? What triggered the round-the-clock detail? And how far will authorities go to keep them safe? Join Red Carpet revealed as we piece together the threats, the timeline, and the stakes, starting now. Dusk settles the way it does when a neighborhood is trying to remember what ordinary felt like. A porch light clicks on before the sky decides if it will cooperate. And the steady idle of a patrol car hums against the curb like a low, mechanical lullaby. Two officers log a shift change on a clipboard that looks out of place beside a flower bed. Across the street, blinds move, just an inch, and then stay. If you didn't know, you'd think this was a film set gearing up for another take. But the camera is real, mounted above the doorbell. And the script is not. It begins with a decision made in rooms that speak in matrices. To place a 24/7 protective detail around the parents of Menglong after a week in which concern hardened into cause. The threshold from worry to guard duty is never a single step. It is a staircase built from specifics. First came messages, clipped, untraceable at a glance, sent to public-facing inboxes that once collected little more than holiday greetings. Calls that hung up after one ring. The kind of ghosting that spooks because it performs intention without signature. A neighbor mentioned an unfamiliar car idling at odd hours. A package arrived with no return address. As a threat. Each event alone is a shrug, together they learn a geometry. Police speak of threat vectors, of persistence and proximity, of content that crosses into credible. The family's representative filed reports with numbers you can put on a form and a face you cannot. A watch commander looked at the grid and moved a marker from elevated to sustained. The order was signed quietly. Guards arrived louder than anyone wanted and quieter than anyone expected. Continuous protection is not an armored halo. It is routine. Repeated until it becomes a barrier simply by being there. Roving patrol, fixed post, perimeter checks, timed calls. The kind of paperwork that saves lives by making it impossible to forget when and where something should have happened. Officers walk the same loop so many times that the concrete learns their names. They wave at dog walkers who have learned to wave back without stopping. Inside the house, life tries to compress into smaller rooms. Groceries are now logistics. Doctor's appointments are escorted. Visitors are on RSVP with a badge. Doors lock earlier. Arrives later. The radios whisper. Once an off-key lullaby becomes part of the thermostat, all was there, regulating the temperature of worry. There is no glamour in the logbook. The entries are all nouns and timestamps. Adjectives kept on a leash. 1903, vehicle passes twice, plate recorded. 2141, unknown caller. No message, number preserved. 317, motion detected, raccoon confirmed. Even the jokes are procedural. Changed under breath. Almost penitential. As if humor were a contraband they can only admit to in the form of a smile. The officers here have guarded dignitaries who sought cameras. And witnesses who feared them. They know which kind of vigilance this is. This one is about keeping people alive long enough for the slow parts of the system to do their work. The parts that leave behind file numbers and footnotes and, eventually, maybe, a verdict that makes space for grief to become memory. The week that forced the decision did not announce itself with sirens. It looked, at first, like the ordinary cruelty of the internet. Accounts with new birthdays. Screenshots cropped to tell a story sharper than the truth. The quiet choreography of pressure, third parties who suddenly wanted meetings. Intermediaries with advice that sounded generous until you asked for who sent them. Somewhere in that week, an anonymous post included a detail about the family's routine that wasn't public. That is the moment law enforcement stops thinking in abstractions. Specificity is a key that fits too many locks. Risk assessment playbook. 3 words decide tempo: specific, credible, persistent. Specific means the threat names a time, a place, a person, a method. Credible means it might actually happen, the sender's history, the proximity, the context that won't stop rhyming with itself. Persistent means it keeps coming even after you do the obvious things: block, report, change routes, stop answering. The family had done the obvious things. The wave kept coming. A lieutenant did the math and signed a form that has no poetry in it. Only responsibility. Patrol cars rolled. If you stand on that curb long enough, The metaphors suggest themselves. Safety as a porch light. Justice as a horizon. But the reality is smaller. All is the point. A mechanic from 3 houses over offers to adjust a camera angle. He's thanked, and it is logged. Because kindness must coexist with chain of custody. A cousin brings soup and puts it down on a table as if setting a perimeter around the only place heat still feels harmless. Someone says grace. It is not dramatic. It is. For this house, necessary. Police are careful about what they say on the record. Instituted continuous protection following a risk review indicating sustained threat vectors. The spokesperson says. We saw enough to risk being early rather than late. The family's representative is less technical. This is not about privilege, she says. It's about survival. The neighbors form a WhatsApp group with a name so cheerful it sounds like a lie. They share license plates and jokes about raccoons and weather. Solidarity is a tool disguised as chatter. Reporting on a house under guard asks for a different kind of craft. You do not write about routes. You do not publish photos of sightlines. Do not turn a safe room into a set. You quote documents. You cite times and filings. You do not put a stranger's hand on the doorknob by telling them where the doorknob is. There is an ethic to this that has nothing to do with fear and everything to do with refusing to conscript the curious into an army. By midnight, the night watch has already developed its rituals. The same officer checks the same gate and taps it with the back of his knuckles. A superstition that doubles as quality control. Second car drifts past and pauses at the corner as if it has encountered an unsolved equation. Porch light that used to quit at 11 continues. Does its shift change? On a kitchen table, a stack of forms. A glass of water, a phone face down. A photo frame turned inward because sometimes even love can feel like exposure. What remains unclear is exactly what always remains unclear at the start of these stories: who is behind the pressure? What they want most? Will settle for. Law enforcement narrows suspects by method. Platforms preserve logs that will decide whether the burner account was truly a ghost or simply a coward. Subpoenas go out. Replies come back in. Patience is asked and resented in equal measure. The guards keep watch anyway. Investigation is a verb that needs a noun called time. So the first part of this story ends where it has to, with the night still young and the guards still a presence. The kind that says you live here louder than any threat can say you shouldn't. The question that opened is, what crossed the threshold, has a preliminary answer now. Enough did. What comes next will test who else is willing to cross thresholds, platforms that must escalate. Courts that must move. Community that must refuse to let fear write policy. Light stays on. Morning pours onto the street with the easy confidence of a day that has not read the night's logbook. The patrol car has rotated. The voices on the radio have new vowels. Inside the house, coffee makes the room smell like a dare. Protection is a pause button, accountability is the playhead catching up. To understand the work now. The verbs that matter: order, preserve, authenticate, charge, or decide not to. With reasons that can survive sunlight. Protective orders, when they're granted, are paperwork with consequences. They say stay back this many meters, do not contact. Do not direct third parties to contact. Do not make the internet a loophole and call it free speech. When lines are crossed, the response must be more than a shrug. The law here is not glamorous, it is a sequence. A judge reads a declaration. A clerk stamps a page. Duty serves a piece of paper that turns into a wall. Wall will hold only if everyone agrees to treat it as made of something harder than pulp. Parallel to the legal lane runs the platform lane. Built out of APIs and policies and the constant tension between speed and precision. Platforms handle threat reports on triage, first safety, then provenance. They're portals. For law enforcement. Collect what civilians can't see: IP hops, ice fingerprints, account linkages that make burner identities less magical. Letters fly early, the digital equivalent of don't you dare sweep the crumbs. When platforms work, a chain of evidence is a zipper. When they don't, it's a sieve. In this case, sources say, zipper is at least being zipped. Tickets opened. Preserved. Accounts disabled. The churn continues anyway. As intimidation loves a workaround. And workarounds are cheap. Who pays for the guard is a less rhetorical question than it sounds. Departments budget for extraordinary details the way families budget for sudden storms, grudgingly. Then carefully shift stretch. Time accumulates. Watch commanders juggle rosters that were designed for routine. This is where oversight matters, not to second-guess safety, but to make sure exceptional does not become elastic. Civilian review boards can ask, how many details lasted how long for whom? Under what criteria? Inspectors general can audit whether the matrix that triggered protection treats names fairly and not merely loudly. Transparency does not have to expose tactics, it should expose patterns. If there is coordination behind the threats, money, proxies, third-party fan groups that behave like mercenaries under a banner of plausible deniability, then following the cash matters. Filings, if they come, feel like accountancy because they are, transfers, invoices, services that evaporate on contact with questions. If there isn't coordination, the story is smaller and in some ways harder, because it means ambient malice had enough persistence to require public resources. Both truths can be true at once, a weak center amplified by strong margins. A family cannot live on adrenaline forever. Safety planning must survive the guard. That means hardware and habits. It means doors that lock in 3 dimensions. Cameras aimed to collect evidence rather than drama. Jeff-Enst alerts that tell you intention before it knocks. A neighbor agreement that is more than a group chat, the kind where someone volunteers to keep an eye on the corner you can't see and promises not to turn it into a vigilante franchise. It means a calendar that includes rest as a duty. Counseling that treats vigilance fatigue as real, because it is. Legally, the path forks into familiar scenarios. In the first, suspects are identified, charged, and record supports it. Convicted of crimes that sound bureaucratic but save lives: stalking, harassment, witness intimidation, criminal threats. Guard scales down carefully. The porch light becomes a choice again. In the second, the evidentiary picture is mixed, enough to obtain civil protective orders and platform bans. Not enough to criminally charge anyone beyond a single burner who is as disposable as a match. Safety becomes a managed condition rather than a resolved one. In the third, no charges come, there are administrative consequences and a long tail of watchfulness. It is the least satisfying option, and the one the system must be honest about when it is all the system has. There is a cultural component here that the courts cannot administer and the platforms cannot code. Communities decide, by example. Intimidation works. They do it by refusing to amplify unsourced claims. By treating doxing like pollution that poisons everyone downstream. By teaching their children that attention is not virtue. Do it by making space for a family to buy vegetables without being turned into a selfie. They do it by remembering that the opposite of fear is not bravado, it is care. Comparative cases teach without pretending to be perfect fits. In one city, a journalist's family received a 24/7 detail for 6 weeks after specific threats named their route to school. Lifted only after a combination of charges and platform cooperation made the cost of continued pressure higher than the thrill. In another, a witness's parents were protected for 3 months as a trial approached. The guard came and went in cycles as evidence dictated. And the community learned to live with a patrol car as part of the block's heartbeat. The lesson is not that details end. That they should end because risk does, not because attention does. If you ask the officers how success is measured, they will say it without poetry: nothing happened. Pride in the anticlimax, and wisdom, too. The best stories about safety are the ones the world never has to read. But accountability demands a different metric alongside that modest one. Someone answered. Not just with presence. Consequence. A letter of apology, however eloquent, is not a remedy. A platform policy, however stern, not executed until the ban holds. A protective order, however well drafted, is not justice until it has at least once been enforced against someone who thought paper was pretend. As days string into a necklace of similar beads, temptation is to let vigilance numb into wallpaper. Actors fight that by swapping routes and checking assumptions. By talking each other through the human tendency to normalize the unlikely. Families fight it by refusing to audition for the role of the perpetually hunted. The city fights it by remembering this is not spectacle but service. The camera above the door records the same patch of air. The porch light stays steady. The patrol's tires crackle the same grit at the curb. The end of this story, if it earns one, will not arrive with symbols. It will be a memo and an exhale. Will be a date on the calendar when the last scheduled perimeter check is replaced by a neighbor's wave and a dog's bark. It will be a smaller thing than the fear that required the larger thing. It will require the discipline from all of us. The conditions that made the larger thing necessary from reassembling themselves out of neglect. Until then, the guard remains. Not as theater. Not as overreaction. Not as a political statement to be argued over by people far from the curb. As a bridge between now and a later in which a family's front door can be just a door again. The officers will continue to log things too boring for headlines and too important for hindsight. The parents will continue to live. Which is the most profound defiance available to them. The community will continue to watch, not as warriors. Neighbors who understand that safety is at commons. Then, finally, the day comes that the porch light clicks off at a reasonable hour. Patrol car turns the corner without leaving another to take its place. The victory will look like nothing at all. The kind of nothing that has to be earned. The kind of nothing that makes room for everything else. The patrol car's hum was never the point, it was the promise. Round-the-clock protection turned chaos into pause long enough for law, platforms, and community to do the slower work of accountability. Story changes anything. Let it be our habits, verify before amplifying. First before announcing. And measure success not by headlines but by the quiet of an ordinary night. Safety is a bridge, justice is where that bridge should land. Thank you for reading with patience and care. Attention, measured in rigor. Not clicks, creates space for survivor-centered reporting, fair defense. System that protects families while pursuing accountability. Stay with us for verified updates as investigations progress and the guard, when it's truly safe, steps back.